What if I told you that one decision, one moment of pride, politics, and broken promises split not just a kingdom, but the future of an entire people? The story of Israel and Judah isn't just ancient history, it's a mirror. A mirror reflecting leadership gone wrong, loyalty torn in two, and the quiet faithfulness of God weaving hope through chaos. We often think of the Bible in highlights: David slaying Goliath, Moses parting the sea, Jesus walking on water. But hidden in the cracks between those iconic moments lies a civil war that reshaped the spiritual and political landscape of God's people. The division of the United Kingdom into Israel and Judah wasn't random, it was prophetic. It revealed hearts, tested loyalties, and forced a nation to wrestle with identity, justice, and grace. In this video, we'll dive into the real reasons behind the split, the kings who made it worse, the prophets who cried out for repentance, and the hidden thread of redemption that refused to snap, even when everything fell apart. From Solomon's throne to Babylon's exile, from Rehoboam's arrogance to Jeremiah's tears, you're about to see how this one division changed everything. So buckle up, not for a lecture, but a journey through betrayal, revival, collapse, and covenant. By the end, you won't just know what happened, you'll understand why it still matters today. Let's begin. The biblical story of Israel and Judah begins in a fascinating way, when all the tribes were united under a single king, an idea that seemed ideal for preserving national strength and identity. This unity was not only political, but also spiritual, creating a solid foundation for the people of God. Imagine a large family that shares values, dreams, and a common purpose. That's how the kingdom functioned before the division. This unity made the people one body, with one heart, despite all regional differences. The loss of that unity would bring deep consequences that would affect nearly every aspect of the people's lives. The reign of Rehoboam begins within this delicate context, as he tries to take on the legacy left by his father, Solomon, whose fame for wisdom and wealth was known throughout the region. However, Rehoboam faced the heavy burden of maintaining what had been built, and his rule exposed political weaknesses that ultimately accelerated the separation. Instead of listening to the elders who advised moderation, he chose to follow the advice of the younger men, and that decision proved costly. When we think about leadership, we can learn from Rehoboam that pride and an unwillingness to listen can destroy even the strongest foundations. Jeroboam, who emerges as the main figure of the northern kingdom, was seen by many as a rebel, but also as a leader trying to save his people. The ambiguity of Jeroboam's role in this division shows that, in the biblical story of Israel and Judah, characters are rarely black and white. He created alternative temples and worship systems to prevent the people from returning to Judah, aiming to ensure the survival of the new kingdom. This strategy shows how religion was used not only as a matter of faith, but also as a political tool, a theme that would become crucial in both kingdoms. This division was not just about power, it was also about geography and natural resources. The kingdom of Judah had Jerusalem, a spiritual and strategic center, though smaller in territory. Meanwhile, the kingdom of Israel included vast and fertile lands with more resources for trade and agriculture. This geopolitical reality greatly influenced the dynamics of the split, like a board game where each piece had a different position and strategies had to be carefully planned for survival. For ordinary people, this meant daily challenges as they adapted to a new reality. Idolatry is a chapter of its own in the story of Israel and Judah's division. Both kingdoms used religion as a means to control and consolidate power, creating parallel cults and promoting practices that strayed from the original faith. This spiritual manipulation brought serious consequences, and the prophets of the Old Testament emerged precisely to confront these deviations, as persistent voices calling the people to repentance. It's a lesson for today about how faith and power can intertwine, sometimes in dangerous ways. Moreover, we cannot forget the interference of foreign powers, such as Assyria and Babylon, which took advantage of this division to expand their empires. Political fragmentation weakened both kingdoms, making them easy targets for conquerors. Here we see a classic example of how disunity opens the door to external threats, a concept that applies not only to ancient kingdoms, but also to modern situations, whether in business, politics, or personal relationships. And so, this lost unity paved the way for the rise of prophets, social crisis, and all the events that shaped the destiny of the kingdoms. The division of Israel and Judah was not an accident, but a complex and multifaceted process that deserves to be fully understood. This story, rich in details and lessons, continues to echo for those who seek to deeply understand the journey of God's people. The reign of Rehoboam, Solomon's son, started under a huge shadow. Solomon's legacy was not just about wisdom and wealth, but also about high expectations. Rehoboam inherited a kingdom that expected stability and prosperity, but also a leader who could maintain unity. Instead, his choices showed how difficult it is to live up to a famous predecessor. This teaches us that sometimes legacy can be a heavy burden, especially if we ignore wise counsel or rush decisions. Rehoboam's story reminds leaders today about the importance of humility and listening to experience. When faced with the request to lighten the burden on the people, Rehoboam rejected the advice of older counselors and followed the harsher advice of his peers. This decision led to alienation and ultimately to the division of the kingdom. It's a powerful example of how leadership style, authoritarian versus empathetic, can change history dramatically. Think about your own workplace or community. Are you truly listening to all voices? The legacy of Solomon also included high taxes and forced labor, which created widespread dissatisfaction. Rehoboam inherited these policies without making them his own, failing to adapt to changing times. This rigidity contributed to the split. In any leadership role, it's crucial to understand when to hold on to traditions, for example, and when to companies innovate. That fail to evolve their strategies risk losing employees and customers, similar to how Israel lost loyalty under Rehoboam's rule. Interestingly, Rehoboam's reign illustrates how political decisions often reflect deeper spiritual and social realities. The division wasn't just political, it mirrored a spiritual crisis. The kingdom's fracture symbolized a breaking away from God's intended unity for his people. This perspective adds a layer of meaning to the history, showing us how leadership affects not only policies, but also the soul of a community. The burden of legacy is something anyone can relate to. Whether in family businesses, creative projects, or even personal habits, inherited expectations can either inspire or suffocate. Rehoboam's story teaches that the way forward involves balance, respect for the past, but courage to make changes. Practical advice would be to seek diverse opinions before making important decisions, something every leader or influencer should adopt. The reign of Rehoboam is a perfect example of how history is shaped by personal choices and character. His failure to unify the kingdom reflects how human decisions can alter the course of entire nations. It's a reminder that leadership is less about title and more about wisdom and empathy. If you're in a position of influence, consider how your decisions affect those you lead, not just now, but for generations. And so, the legacy of Solomon and the reign of Rehoboam open the door to understanding the next key figure, Jeroboam, whose complex role in the history of the division challenges simple labels of hero or villain. The story unfolds with more layers ahead. Jeroboam emerges as a pivotal figure during the split of Israel, a leader both controversial and complex. Once a servant in Solomon's court, his rise to power was marked by divine prophecy and political ambition. Rather than a simple rebel, Jeroboam can be seen as a pragmatic leader who sought to protect his people's interests in uncertain times. His story highlights how leadership often involves difficult decisions with far-reaching consequences. One of Jeroboam's most notable moves was establishing alternative religious centers in Bethel and Dan, deliberately away from Jerusalem. This decision was strategic, aiming to prevent his subjects from returning to the southern kingdom for worship, which could undermine his authority. This shows how religion was tightly woven into politics, and how control over worship practices was crucial for maintaining power. Today, it reminds us how belief systems and ideology often influence governance and social cohesion. Jeroboam's establishment of golden calves as symbols of worship is a stark example of how political expediency can distort spiritual truth. While intended to unify and stabilize his kingdom, this act was criticized by prophets and seen as a deviation from true worship. This tension between politics and faith is a recurring theme in the history of Israel and Judah, reflecting broader human struggles to balance power with principle. Despite his flaws, Jeroboam's reign was not without achievements. He managed to consolidate the northern tribes, strengthening the kingdom economically and militarily. The northern kingdom enjoyed fertile lands and important trade routes, which helped sustain its independence for many years. Jeroboam's leadership reminds us that even controversial figures can bring stability and growth in times of upheaval. However, Jeroboam's legacy also serves as a warning about the dangers of compromising core values for political gain. The northern kingdom's idolatry and deviation from the covenant eventually led to its downfall. This story invites reflection on the cost of sacrificing integrity and the long-term effects of leadership choices. Whether in nations or organizations, shortcuts and compromises can have lasting negative impacts. In sum, Jeroboam's story illustrates the complexity of leadership in turbulent times, a mixture of vision, ambition, political savvy, and moral challenges. Understanding his role helps us grasp the deeper dynamics behind the division of Israel and Judah, and the interplay between faith, power, and identity. The saga continues with more lessons from prophets and kings, shaping the destiny of God's people. The division of Israel and Judah was more than just a family feud. It was a seismic geopolitical shift that shaped the fate of two kingdoms. When the kingdoms split, the physical borders became stark realities, defining not only land, but identity and resources. The kingdom of Israel, up north, had fertile plains and strategic trade routes, but also a more exposed frontier vulnerable to invasions. Meanwhile, the kingdom of Judah, centered around Jerusalem, benefited from natural fortifications but had fewer agricultural advantages. This geographical separation led to distinct political strategies. Israel, surrounded by powerful neighbors, often relied on alliances and military strength to survive. Judah, with its smaller territory, leaned more on diplomacy and religious legitimacy centered around the temple. These different approaches reflect how the kingdoms adapted to their environment, but also exposed their weaknesses. For example, Israel's northern location made it a target for the expanding Assyrian Empire, while Judah's reliance on spiritual authority sometimes left it politically isolated. Economically, the two kingdoms faced unique challenges. Israel's control of major trade routes boosted its wealth, but internal strife and idolatry undermined stability. Judah's economy was more localized and less prosperous, but had a stronger religious cohesion that fostered social order. This economic divergence contributed to the unfolding of their destinies, showing how geography and resource distribution play into national survival. An important lesson, even for today's leaders, balancing regional advantages and risks. The division also fragmented the people culturally. Over time, dialects, customs, and religious practices began to diverge, though both kingdoms still shared a common heritage. This cultural evolution affected how each kingdom viewed itself and its neighbors, deepening the divide. It's like siblings raised apart, developing different worldviews. Their shared history remains, but daily life creates new identities. Understanding this helps us see the deep impact of political boundaries beyond mere maps. One cannot ignore the constant threat of external powers exploiting this split. The Assyrians, and later the Babylonians, used the division as an opportunity to expand their empires. They played the two kingdoms against each other, weakening them both. This reminds us how internal division can invite external domination, a timeless warning. Leaders and communities today can learn the importance of unity in facing outside pressures. Despite the political challenges, the division sparked moments of reform and renewal, especially in Judah, where kings like Hezekiah and Josiah sought to restore faith and centralize worship. These attempts were responses to the instability that division brought, but also shaped the spiritual landscape profoundly. The kingdom's fate was not sealed by geography alone. Leadership choices made all the difference. This geopolitical chapter in the history of Israel and Judah is foundational for understanding the broader biblical narrative. The division influenced not only political history, but also religious development and prophetic messages. As we move forward, exploring the interplay between power, faith, and identity, the story of the two kingdoms invites us to reflect on our own divisions and the paths toward healing and restoration. Religion in the divided kingdoms of Israel and Judah wasn't just about faith. It was a powerful tool used to shape and control people. Imagine how leaders, desperate to maintain their grip on power, would manipulate religious beliefs to justify their rule. In both kingdoms, idolatry became more than worship. It turned into political strategy, binding the people's loyalty to the throne or alienating them when faith was compromised. In the kingdom of Israel, Jeroboam's decision to establish alternative worship centers with golden calves was a masterstroke of political control. It wasn't just about religion, it was about keeping people from traveling to Jerusalem in Judah, thus preventing reunification. This shows how religious symbols can be weaponized, changing faith practices to serve political goals. Think of it like modern-day branding: control the narrative, and you control the masses. On the other hand, Judah struggled to balance its spiritual heritage with political realities. Jerusalem remained the religious heart, but the kings often faltered, blending faith with political ambition. This mix often led to religious hypocrisy and decline, as prophets of the Old Testament fiercely criticized this betrayal. Their messages weren't just spiritual warnings, they were calls for political accountability, urging leaders to align their policies with genuine worship. Idolatry, then, can be seen as a symptom of deeper power struggles. When trust in leadership waned, alternative gods and idols gained followers. This pattern is seen throughout history. Whenever people feel neglected or oppressed, they seek something tangible to cling to. Today, we can relate this to how ideologies or leaders exploit belief systems to manipulate groups, reminding us to always question what's behind the faith we follow. The prophets played a crucial role here, confronting rulers and people alike. Figures like Elijah and Isaiah didn't just preach, they exposed the political use of religion and called for sincere repentance. Their courage to speak truth to power offers timeless lessons. Whether in spiritual or secular realms, authenticity and integrity are the foundation of lasting leadership. For us today, that means fostering transparency and aligning our values with actions. This dynamic between religion and power also affected social cohesion. When faith was used as a tool of control, it often divided communities rather than united them. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah remind us how dangerous it can be when religious identity becomes a political weapon. sometimes leading to persecution or civil unrest. Understanding this helps us appreciate the delicate balance between belief and governance. As this tension unfolded, foreign powers like Assyria and Babylon watched eagerly, ready to exploit the kingdom's internal weaknesses. But before we dive into their influence, it's worth reflecting on how faith, politics, and power intertwine, shaping the course of history in profound ways, ready to explore the external forces that sealed the fate of Israel and Judah. The history of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah cannot be understood without considering the role of the foreign powers of the time. Assyria and Babylon emerged as dominant forces in the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, closely observing the division and fragility of these peoples. The expansionist policy of these powers became a constant threat, pressuring both kingdoms to adopt strategies that often weakened them even further. Israel was the first to succumb to Assyrian expansion. Its strategic location, close to trade routes and vulnerable borders, made it an easy target. Despite attempts to ally with other peoples and resist militarily, the Northern Kingdom was conquered in 722 BC, and its people were dispersed. This destruction represented not only a political loss, but also the end of a consolidated national identity. Judah, on the other hand, faced a different but equally tragic fate. The Southern Kingdom tried to survive countless external threats through alliances and temporary submissions, alternating between resisting and negotiating with invaders. Even so, in 586 BC, the Babylonian army invaded Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and took the Judean elite into exile, an event known as the Babylonian captivity, a crucial moment in the religious and cultural history of the people. These episodes marked the end of independent kingdoms and began a period of great suffering, but also one of reflection and renewal. The exile forced the people of Judah to rethink their identity and faith, giving rise to new forms of religiosity that influence Judaism to this day. This spiritual transformation, born out of pain and loss, is one of the most important legacies of that period. Meanwhile, the foreign powers continued their expansion, using political and military tactics to maintain control over conquered territories. The dominance of these nations established the standard for international relations in the region for centuries, influencing the politics, culture, and even the religion of the subjugated peoples. Understanding this dynamic is essential for grasping the challenges faced by Israel and Judah. Beyond military strength, the political and cultural manipulation of the invading powers sought to destabilize the internal structures of the kingdoms. They encouraged divisions, supported rival factions, and imposed new customs, all to ensure that no real threat would arise against their rule. This strategy succeeded, weakening resistance and accelerating the fall of the kingdoms. In the end, the fall of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah is a milestone that demonstrates how internal and external factors intertwine to shape history. The impact of these conquests goes beyond politics, affecting the faith, culture, and collective identity of the people. In the following topics, we will explore how the prophets and spiritual leaders responded to these dramatic changes, offering hope in times of crisis. The fall of Israel and Judah was not just a political disaster, but a profound spiritual crisis. Amid this turmoil, the prophets emerged as voices of divine truth, challenging kings and people alike. They spoke out against corruption, idolatry, and injustice, urging a return to faithfulness. Their message was clear. Despite judgment, hope and restoration were still possible if the people repented sincerely. Prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel faced great opposition, yet they remained steadfast in delivering God's warnings and promises. Jeremiah, known as the weeping prophet, lamented the destruction, but also proclaimed a new covenant, a hope for renewal beyond exile. Ezekiel's visions, full of symbolic imagery, offered reassurance that God's presence would return and bring life to a broken people. This prophetic response highlighted the importance of personal and communal repentance. It wasn't enough to merely survive politically. The heart had to turn back to God. The prophets emphasized justice, mercy, and humility as keys to restoring the relationship between God and his people. Their calls for repentance were both a warning and an invitation to transformation. Interestingly, these messages went beyond immediate circumstances. The prophets envisioned a future kingdom where peace and righteousness would prevail. This eschatological hope shaped Jewish thought for centuries and influenced Christian theology deeply. The idea of a messianic age brought comfort and motivation to a people facing exile and loss. The prophets also played a role in preserving cultural identity during exile. Through their teachings and writings, they kept alive the memory of God's promises and the law. This spiritual resilience helped the Jewish people maintain a sense of purpose and identity, even when far from their homeland. It was a crucial foundation for their eventual return and rebuilding. Their courage in confronting kings and commoners alike teaches us timeless lessons about speaking truth to power. The prophets remind us that faith is not passive acceptance, but active engagement with justice and righteousness. Their legacy challenges believers today to live with integrity and hope, even in difficult times. As we reflect on the prophets' role, we see how their message of hope and renewal shines through history's darkest moments. They model how faith can be a source of strength and transformation. Next, we'll explore how this prophetic tradition shaped the development of the New Covenant and its lasting impact on faith communities worldwide. The concept of the New Covenant emerges as a pivotal theme following the exile and prophetic calls for renewal. Rooted in Jeremiah's promise of a covenant written on the heart, it marks a profound shift from the old covenant based on the law to a more intimate, personal relationship with God. This new agreement emphasizes internal transformation rather than external adherence to rules alone. The new covenant signifies God's desire to dwell within his people, making them his living temple. It highlights the promise of forgiveness and restoration, breaking the cycle of sin and judgment that plagued Israel and Judah. This covenant points forward to a time when God's Spirit would empower individuals to live righteously, beyond mere ritual compliance. This development had deep theological implications. It redefined the way God's people understood their identity and relationship with him. No longer was obedience simply about avoiding punishment. It became an expression of love and gratitude. The law was internalized, guiding the heart and mind, enabling believers to live with genuine freedom and joy. The New Covenant also serves as a foundation for Christian faith as it is fulfilled in the person and work of Jesus Christ. His life, death, and resurrection inaugurated this new era, offering salvation to all who believe. The promises of Jeremiah and Ezekiel find their ultimate fulfillment in Christ's ministry, uniting God's people in a new spiritual family. Understanding this covenant helps to make sense of the transition from the Old Testament era to the New Testament church. It explains the continuity and discontinuity in God's dealings with humanity. While the moral truths of the law remain, the way they are applied is transformed by grace and the indwelling Spirit. This shift also invites believers into a participatory relationship with God. Faith becomes active and dynamic, rooted in daily reliance on the Spirit's guidance. The New Covenant empowers the community of believers to embody God's love, justice, and mercy in the world, continuing the prophetic mission in new ways. Ultimately, the New Covenant is a message of hope and renewal that transcends historical circumstance. It offers a path to restoration for broken hearts and societies. As we explore this theme further, we'll see how this covenant shapes Christian worship, ethics, and mission in the centuries that follow. During the tumultuous period of the division of Israel and Judah, families and especially women bore a heavy, often overlooked burden. While kings and prophets made headlines, daily life for families shifted drastically. Women, in particular, became anchors of continuity amid chaos, managing households, preserving traditions, and nurturing faith in uncertain times. Their roles were not merely domestic, but vital for cultural and spiritual survival. The division fragmented communities, forcing families to navigate new political realities that often put them at odds with neighbors or even relatives across borders. Women frequently had to adjust to changing social norms and alliances, playing diplomatic roles within households. They became custodians of values and memories, ensuring that despite the split, the shared history of Israel and Judah wasn't forgotten. Economic hardship following the division meant that families had to become more resourceful. Women's work expanded beyond child-rearing into managing land, goods, and local trade, especially when men were conscripted for wars or political duties. This shift sometimes empowered women in practical ways, creating new opportunities even in crisis. For example, women in Judah might oversee vineyards or olive groves, critical to the kingdom's economy. Spiritually, women in both kingdoms played a key part in maintaining religious practices and educating children in the faith. Their role was crucial in times when official religious centers like the temple were politically charged or inaccessible. Women's influence helped keep alive the teachings of the Profetas do Antigo Testamento, prophets of the Old Testament, passing down warnings and hopes from one generation to the next. Families also became microcosms of the broader political tensions. Loyalties were tested when relatives found themselves in opposing kingdoms. Marriages could be political tools, forging alliances or deepening divides. The story of families during this era reveals how personal lives were deeply entangled with the grand narrative of the Reino de Israel and Reino de Judá. The resilience of women and families amid the division teaches modern readers the power of perseverance in the face of upheaval. Today, like then, strong family bonds and cultural transmission are key to surviving and thriving during times of societal change. Reflecting on their example encourages us to value and support the often unseen work that sustains communities. As we continue to explore the consequences of the division, it's important to remember how these intimate social units shaped history just as much as kings and prophets. The roles women and families played were foundational, setting the stage for future diplomatic and spiritual developments in Israel and Judah. When the kingdoms of Israel and Judah split, diplomacy quickly became a delicate dance. Both sides sought alliances to bolster their security and influence, yet these political maneuvers often revealed deeper vulnerabilities. The Reino de Judá and Reino de Israel had to navigate a complex landscape filled with powerful neighbors eager to exploit their division. This political chess game was as much about survival as about power. Kings like Rehoboam of Judah and Jeroboam of Israel used marriages and treaties to forge connections. Sometimes these alliances brought temporary peace or military support, but often they faltered due to mistrust or shifting loyalties. The fragile nature of these pacts underscored how deeply the division weakened internal cohesion. It's like trying to build a house on sand. No matter how strong the walls seem, the foundation keeps shifting. External powers such as Assyria and Babylon played their parts as well, enticing Israel and Judah into vassalage or conflict. These imperial players often made promises or threats to gain control, turning diplomacy into a dangerous game of power politics. The division of Israel and Judah created openings that these empires eagerly exploited, accelerating both kingdoms' downfalls in the long run. Interestingly, diplomacy wasn't only about kings and armies. Local leaders and tribal chiefs had to manage alliances that impacted everyday life, trade, and religious practices. These grassroots political ties sometimes help stabilize regions, but they also expose the kingdoms to fragmentation from within. The division's geopolitical complexity extended beyond the throne room into the lives of common people. Reflecting on these alliances offers lessons for today's leaders about the importance of trust and unity. True diplomacy requires not just strategic deals, but genuine relationships. In your own life, consider how alliances, whether in business, friendship, or community, thrive on consistency and integrity rather than convenience alone. The failures and successes of Israel and Judah's diplomacy illustrate how fragile political power can be when built on shaky alliances. Their experience reminds us to look beyond immediate gains and consider long-term stability. As we explore further, the cultural and linguistic shifts that accompanied these political moves offer even richer insight into the era. This web of diplomacy and fragile treaties set the stage for the profound changes that reshaped both kingdoms culturally and spiritually, a journey that continues in the next topic. When Israel and Judah split, the separation wasn't just political, it rippled deeply into the very fabric of language and culture. While both kingdoms shared the Hebrew language and many traditions, subtle differences began to emerge, reflecting their distinct experiences and challenges. These divergences influenced worship styles, storytelling, and even how the people saw their own identity within the unfolding history. In the northern kingdom of Israel, a more diverse mix of peoples and influences shaped their cultural expression. The influx of outsiders and the rise of alternative religious practices created a unique cultural mosaic. Conversely, Judah, with its smaller, more homogeneous population, leaned heavily on preserving the traditions of their ancestors, keeping a tighter grip on the Hebrew language and the temple-centered worship. This contrast is a powerful reminder of how culture adapts to environment and circumstance. For anyone navigating a divided environment today, whether in families, workplaces, or communities, this teaches an important lesson. Language and culture evolve together. Even shared origins can branch into distinct dialects, customs, and values. Embracing these differences while finding common ground is key to unity without uniformity, a principle useful from diplomacy to everyday relationships. An interesting example is how certain Hebrew words took on different connotations or pronunciations in the two kingdoms, similar to regional dialects today. Imagine how understanding these nuances could be crucial for historians or theologians interpreting ancient texts, and likewise for modern communicators who must navigate cultural subtleties to connect authentically with diverse audiences. Moreover, the split led to variations in religious festivals and temple practices, reflecting divergent theological emphases. Judah maintained the temple in Jerusalem as its spiritual heart, while Israel established alternative worship sites. This schism in worship styles parallels modern debates about tradition versus innovation in faith communities, illustrating how cultural identity often intertwines with spirituality. Language and cultural evolution after the division show that even in separation, there can be threads of convergence, shared stories, beliefs, and hopes that continue to bind a people together. These threads hint at the deep-rooted identity that no political border could erase, much like the shared values that keep diasporic communities connected today. Ultimately, examining the linguistic and cultural shifts post-division enriches our understanding of the broader history of Israel and Judah. It invites us to reflect on how identity is preserved, adapted, or transformed through the forces of time and circumstance, an ongoing story that still speaks powerfully to us now. When Israel and Judah became two distinct kingdoms, their economies had to adapt fast. What once functioned as a unified trade network was suddenly split, with each side needing to forge its own paths to survival and growth. The Reino d'Israel, rich in fertile lands and access to the Mediterranean, leaned heavily on international trade. Meanwhile, the kingdom of Judah, though smaller and more isolated, relied on stability, agriculture, and alliances to keep its economy afloat. This division led to some serious logistical shifts. Trade routes had to be reimagined. Merchants had to navigate new borders, new taxes, and new political tensions. Imagine running a business today and overnight having to deal with new tariffs, competing alliances, and even rival currencies. That was the daily grind for traders in this fractured history of Israel and Judah. Commerce wasn't just about goods, it became a matter of political survival. The northern kingdom's fast-paced economic growth came with a price: instability. Jeroboam's Reino de Israel quickly expanded but lacked deep roots. Rapid wealth can create illusions of security until outside powers like Assyria knock on the door. That's why today, financial advisors warn against overextension. Just like Israel, we can be tempted to grow fast without strengthening foundations. Judah, on the other hand, took a slower, more conservative path. Their economic focus on agriculture and temple offerings may seem outdated now, but it gave them a kind of resilience. In modern terms, it's like choosing long-term investments over risky high returns. There's wisdom in slow, sustainable growth, even when the world celebrates speed and flash. The division of Israel and Judah also shaped economic identities. Israel became known for its wealth and innovation, Judah for its spiritual heritage and endurance. In a way, they reflect two sides of human ambition. One seeks success, the other, significance. And just like today, balance is key. A thriving nation or person needs both purpose and provision. Trade alliances also played a huge role. Judah leaned on Egypt and Assyria at times. Israel sought deals with Phoenicia and others. These partnerships could bring prosperity or disaster. For us, that's a reminder: who we align with financially or relationally shapes our future. Choose wisely. In the end, economics wasn't just numbers for these kingdoms. It was survival, identity, and power. And while Judah and Israel handled it differently, both stories warn us: when your foundation is shaken, your economy feels it first. But wait until you see how spiritual leadership responds to that pressure. Jeremiah wasn't just a prophet. He was a voice that echoed through the ruins of a collapsing nation. At the heart of the kingdom of Judah, his messages rang out like thunder before the storm, warning, weeping, and wrestling with God's people. In the long saga of the division of Israel and Judah, Jeremiah stood as a spiritual anchor during a time when everything else, kings, alliances, even the temple, was crumbling to dust. His words weren't soft. They cut deep, confronting kings and calling out corruption. Imagine standing before national leaders today, pointing out injustice and idolatry, not exactly a path to popularity. But Jeremiah wasn't concerned with applause. He was concerned with truth, and the history of Israel and Judah shows us just how rare and necessary that kind of courage is. In many ways, Jeremiah became the soul of a wounded nation. While prophets in the northern kingdom of Israel like Elijah and Amos brought fire, Jeremiah brought tears. His laments weren't weakness, they were fierce love. He mourned because he saw what could have been. That's something we all feel when watching someone we love make destructive choices, right? It was the timing. The kingdom of Judah was heading toward Babylonian exile, and most people didn't want to hear the hard truth. But Jeremiah kept speaking. That persistence is a lesson for anyone with a calling that feels ignored. Truth often takes root after it's first rejected. So don't stop just because people aren't clapping. He wasn't just a prophet of judgment. Jeremiah spoke of hope too, a new covenant, written not on stone, but on hearts. Even in ruin, he saw redemption. If you've ever walked through disappointment or watched a dream fall apart, Jeremiah's story reminds you, God doesn't waste collapse. He builds something better on the other side. And while many abandoned the prophet, his words outlasted kings and kingdoms. That's legacy, not fame, not fortune, but words that still speak today. If you're chasing impact over image, Jeremiah is your model. Influence isn't always loud, it's lasting. As Judah trembled on the edge of exile, Jeremiah kept proclaiming what many refused to hear. But what happens when the warnings come true and a nation falls into foreign hands? The fall of the kingdom of Israel wasn't sudden. It was a slow unraveling, thread by thread, until the fabric of a once thriving nation could no longer hold. In the grand story of the division of Israel and Judah, Israel's collapse under Assyrian conquest stands as a warning. Strength without substance is a setup for disaster. You can have wealth, armies, and influence, but if your foundation is cracked, it's only a matter of time. Internally, the Reino de Israel was plagued by instability. Kings came and went like shifting shadows, many through assassinations or rebellion. That's not leadership, that's chaos. And when people can't trust who's in charge, trust in everything else, justice, religion, economy, crumbles too. Sound familiar? Many modern systems fall for the same reason. The rot starts from within. Spiritually, the northern kingdom spiraled into idolatry. Jeroboam's golden calves in Bethel and Dan weren't just bad theology, they were political maneuvers to keep people from going to Judah. Religion became propaganda. In today's world, we still see this. Faith twisted for control, truth sacrificed for influence. The history of Israel and Judah teaches us that using the sacred for selfish gain never ends well. Externally, Assyria was a growing storm. With brutal tactics and unmatched strategy, it expanded aggressively, and Israel was right in its path. But here's the kicker. Rather than humbling themselves or turning back to God, Israel made alliances with other nations, trusting in politics over providence. That's like putting a bandage on a broken dam, temporary, ineffective. When Assyria finally invaded, the resistance was weak, the people were fractured, the leadership corrupt, and the prophets ignored. Hosea, Amos, they tried to call Israel back. But warnings unheeded become realities endured. That's a principle that echoes beyond history. If we ignore small cracks today, they become tomorrow's collapse. The fall of Israel left a haunting silence. 10 tribes scattered, cities burned, a kingdom erased. But its memory lingers, a lesson etched in time. Prosperity without principle is a ticking clock. And as we observe the resilience of Judah, a question stirs in the shadows. The kingdom of Judah stood longer than its northern counterpart, but not because it was perfect. It was more like a tree with deep roots, weathering storms, but slowly decaying from the inside. The division of Israel and Judah didn't just split a kingdom, it divided loyalty, worship, and destiny. And yet, amid corruption and failure, Judah carried something the north had long abandoned, a remnant of hope. Judah had its share of wicked kings, but it also had right lights, like Hezekiah and Josiah. These weren't just rulers, they were reformers. They brought back the Torah, tore down altars to foreign gods, and tried to reconnect the people to Yahweh. Their stories remind us that even when everything seems lost, leadership rooted in truth can spark revival. If you're leading anything, a family, a team, a community, don't underestimate the ripple effect of integrity. But old habits die hard. After Josiah's death, Judah slipped back into idolatry and injustice. Prophets like Jeremiah pleaded with the people, "Turn back now or face ruin." His words weren't vague warnings, they were roadmaps to avoid disaster. But the people wanted comfort over truth, rituals over relationship. The history of Israel and Judah proves that stubborn hearts often bring harsh consequences. Then came Babylon, not just as an enemy, but as a divine instrument of correction. The Babylonians didn't simply conquer, they humiliated. They burned Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and carried off the elite. For Judah, it was more than defeat. It was identity collapse. When your place of worship is gone, your land stripped and your leaders exiled, who are you? What do you hold on to? And yet the exile wasn't the end. It was a crucible. In Babylon, Judah discovered the strength of remembrance. They preserved scriptures, clung to promises, and shaped a resilient faith that would survive centuries. It's a powerful reminder that even in the lowest valleys, your roots can grow deeper. If you're walking through personal loss or crisis, like a job loss, grief, or confusion, this part of the biblical history of Judah reminds you, exile is painful, but it can purify. Judah's story in exile whispers an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the thing that breaks you is the thing that makes you. God didn't abandon them. He reshaped them. That's why, out of Judah's ruins, the hope of the Messiah would one day rise. But that hope begins quietly, in foreign soil, carried by the voices of prophets and the prayers of the broken. And in the stillness of captivity, something unexpected begins to stir. When all seemed lost, kingdoms fallen, temples in ruins, people scattered, God whispered a promise that cut through the noise of despair, a new covenant. The division of Israel and Judah had shown how deeply flawed the old systems were when left in human hands. The law had become external, distant, and sometimes even weaponized. But this new covenant, it would be written not on stone tablets, but on hearts. The prophets didn't just talk about punishment. They pointed forward. Jeremiah especially becomes the voice of divine hope. Imagine the scene, Jerusalem in chaos, exile looming, and yet Jeremiah declares, "I will make a new covenant. I will be their God, and they will be my people." This wasn't just theology, it was radical love. In the middle of national failure, God offered restoration through transformation. This new covenant meant the end of empty religion and the beginning of relational intimacy. No longer would people just perform rituals. They'd know God personally. Think of it like the difference between reading about fire and feeling its warmth. That's the level of connection God was promising. And it wasn't just for the kingdom of Judah or the scattered tribes of Israel. It was a covenant with humanity. What's wild is how this connects to our daily lives. Ever felt distant from your purpose, or stuck in routines that look good on the outside but feel hollow inside? That's exactly what the history of Israel and Judah was stuck in. But the new covenant invites us to something more, something internal, alive and unshakable, like when you stop living for approval and start living from identity. And let's not miss the brilliance of timing. These prophecies arose not in times of triumph, but in seasons of utter collapse. God tends to speak clearest when our kingdoms fall apart. It's in the exile, in the silence, that the seeds of hope are planted. Seeds that would eventually bloom into the teachings of Jesus, who declared that he himself was the fulfillment of this covenant. So while the reign of Rehoboam marked the beginning of division and the prophets of the Old Testament cried through centuries of chaos, the story was always heading here, toward unity, toward healing, toward a covenant that could not be broken, not by kings, not by nations, not by human failure. This is the kind of promise that reaches across generations and says, "You're still mine." And now, after all the wars, betrayals, idols, and exiles, one question remains. What will we do with this covenant today? Now that you've seen how the split between Israel and Judah changed the course of history, the real question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Will you just store it away as interesting Bible trivia, or will you allow it to shake your understanding of leadership, obedience, and divine purpose? The rise and fall of the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah teach us something personal. Compromise destroys unity, pride isolates, and when we drift from God's voice, we lose more than land, we lose legacy. But the story doesn't end in ruins. The prophets of the Old Testament didn't just warn of judgment. They pointed to restoration, to a new covenant, to hope that still breathes today. So think about it. Where in your life is there division that needs healing? What kingdom are you building? Your own or God's? Don't just move on from this video like it's another scroll through your feed. Let this be a turning point. Comment below with your thoughts. What struck you the most? Which part of Israel's story mirrors your own? I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to keep learning and growing through these deep biblical truths, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications. More revelations are coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss them.